We're a few minutes late getting started. There's a sign-up sheet over here. If anybody wants to sign up, please do so. And please, I haven't seen the sheet. I don't know how many people are on it, but we may have to limit testimony possibly, depending on how many people we have. We certainly don't want to be here. We'll stay as long as need to be, of course, so that everybody can have an opportunity to speak. But at the same time, depending on the number of people that want to, we may have to limit. I hope everybody will certainly go along with us as you normally do. Let's see. Is Representative Goldick, I know he's down here. Is he in the... Oh, that's Rick. I'm sorry, I couldn't see you for the poll. Come on up and have a seat, please. Representative Goldick.
Mr. Chairman, could I bother you for a copy of the bill, if you got it?
If you got another copy. We're going to get you one.
Thanks. Thank you.
I don't have but one person signed up, so that's all I want to sign. Just speak now, forever hold your peace. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is House Bill 849. Representative Chairman Goldick, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. House Bill 849 plugs a hole in our state law as it relates to public accommodation. Public accommodation, which is currently covered under the Civil Rights Act. Public accommodation refers to hotels, restaurants, movie houses. I think there's even a reference to soda fountains because it goes ahead and lifts language from the Federal Civil Rights Act. And it simply provides the same protections that are currently found in federal law in state law. We're one of 4 or 5 states, I believe, that does not have a state-level Public Accommodation Act. The bill itself very purposefully cuts and pastes federal law and places it into state code, with the exception, of course, of the remedy, and the remedy would come through, to an aggrieved party, would be through the state the Georgia Commission on Equal Opportunity, and the same process that they have right now on the employment side, and trying to simplify that process. I don't think this is an issue that is rampant in Georgia. I think just the opposite. I think 99-point-something% of businesses or entities that may be affected by something like this wouldn't discriminate against anybody. But you know, so many times we pass laws here that are for the very small minority of cases, certainly in the criminal context that I deal with on a regular basis. We're not legislating there for the vast majority of Georgians, just for the very, very, very small percent of individuals. This is really no different. And I just want to make sure that that's clear. I tried again to keep it as simple as possible so that we could go ahead and fill that gap as it exists in federal law, and then, of course, with the state-level remedy. I've gotten the question about what's the real problem. Is there a real problem here? And I don't think there is a tremendous problem. The issue at all. I think the issue here is one of, again, the remedy. Right now, if on the off chance, and I think it is an off chance, that something like this were to occur, an aggrieved party's remedy is what? It's to file a complaint with the federal government, and assumedly how many years that's going to take, for that situation to go ahead and remedy itself. This would allow a more expedited route for an individual on the state level. It's a very simple administrative process, again, that is already existing in state law, and it gives them at least a somewhat expedited route to relief one way or the other. And that's simply the bill, nothing more, nothing less, and I'll be happy to answer any questions if I can.
All right, I do have a question. Who's 12? Roger. Representative Bruce, go ahead.
I looked at the bill over the weekend, And actually, I tried to call you to talk to you about it.
Okay.
And one side of me, I got mixed emotions about what's going on. I just had to talk about it. I'm trying to first get an understanding of the motivation at this time. The Civil Rights Bill passed 40 years ago?
Sure.
60 years ago, long time ago. And while I am obviously, for obvious reasons, an advocate for all of the components of that act, I'm just trying to understand the motivation at this point in time. And then, secondly, as I read it, there's nothing in the bill that actually provides anything that's not already covered by the Civil Rights Act. Is that a correct statement?
It is a correct statement. This is covered right now, as I hope I alluded to a few minutes ago, about this is covered on the federal level, but we don't have an analogous act on the state level. 40-something states have such a law on their state books. We do not.
Okay.
Does it mean that we must have something on our books on the state level? No, it doesn't. Is there a route right now for an aggrieved party to take? Yes, there is, and it's on the federal level, but there isn't one on the state level, and of course takes a fair amount of time on the federal level for things to get done. But that really is, in a very simple statement, that's correct.
Okay. So given that, I go back to the first question. I am obviously a proponent of making sure that everybody has equal rights under all laws, state, federal, whatever. But I'm just curious as to the motivation as to why 60 years later there's an interest in doing this.
Again, there's no, other than filling the gap in our current state law, there is no other interest other than filling that gap. Again, it's more about the remedy. If a person were to experience that, could they go the federal route? Yes, they could. And the time that it would take to go ahead and deal with that. On the state level, at least in the bill right now, it's a fairly expedited process, at least compared to the federal government, I believe, on how that would, be dealt with, and people can get their question, their issue dealt with on a more expedited basis. I believe that's really to me, that's the procedural impetus of the bill. In terms of a policy, it just seems like the right thing to do.
Well, it is definitely the right thing to do. Like I said, I'm just curious as to why it took 60 years to do the right thing.
No, that's an interesting question.
Well, Mr. Chairman, also with your bill that you have provided here, it gives an administrative procedure, and that administrative procedure can be heard extremely quickly, as opposed to filing a petition in court and having all the various hearings and discovery that you have in that. But this provides an immediate remedy, if at all possible, through a commission, and that likewise can then be appealed initially on to the Superior Court if need be.
Yes, sir.
But this will handle this, and of course, if you've got to file it in the federal court, the hoops that you have to jump through in the federal court, you could be jumping through hoops for 6 months, and we could already have something heard under your bill if it passes.
That's correct, and that's really the practical consideration behind it more than anything else.
Thank you.
Representative Weld.
I'll wait, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Anyone else have any questions of Chairman Golett? Chairman, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. Mr. Jeff Graham. Mr. Graham. Thank you for coming again today. Just saw you last Thursday.
Definitely. It's a pleasure to be here again.
Well, have a seat, please. Please, for this group, please tell us your name and who you're with, please.
Thank you, sir. My name is Jeff Graham. I'm the Executive Director of Georgia Equality. Our mission is to advance fairness, safety, and opportunity for gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender communities throughout Georgia. I certainly want to start off by offering my appreciation to Representative Golett and the other sponsors of House Bill 849. Preserving the rights of all Georgians, including people of faith and gay and transgender individuals, is the conversation that we frankly have been hoping to have for the last several years. Passing this legislation would put Georgia on par with the 45 other states that have already enacted statewide public accommodations legislation. Unfortunately, the current language of House Bill 849 still leaves many Georgians vulnerable to discrimination. Specifically missing from the legislation are women, people with disabilities, the LGBT community, the elderly, and veterans. Unlike other groups, there are currently no state or federal laws that provide protection to the LGBT community in discrimination in the workplace, in housing, or in accessing public accommodations. However, there are 59 cities and counties in Georgia that have enacted some form of local ordinance that protects at least some of our community against many of these forms of discrimination. And as a community, we need these protections. In the only broad survey done of the LGBT community in Georgia, 48% of the respondents surveyed reported that they had experienced discrimination in a public establishment in the previous year. When he first introduced this legislation, Representative Golick stated that he would like to expand the classes covered by this bill so that the protections are offered are as inclusive as possible. By including sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, age, disability status, and veteran status to the list of protected categories, we have a unique opportunity to state firmly that Georgia is a welcoming state for all who wish to live, visit, or do business here. Thank you.
Anybody have any questions of Mr. Graham? Any members of the committee? Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
As I said, ladies and gentlemen, we only had Mr. Graham was the only individual who did sign up, but in trying to be fair with anybody and everybody, there are a couple of people not in the room. Does anybody else want to have anything to say concerning this bill? I'll allow you to speak now if you'd like to. All right. The bill is now in the breast of this subcommittee. Any discussion concerning or about a motion?
Move to pass.
Have a move and do pass. Have a second. Any discussion? There is no discussion. Oh, I apologize. I didn't see. I was looking the wrong direction. Mr. Representative Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment I'd like to put forward. It should be in your folders.
Unless I punch the wrong one. What number you down?
There you go.
There you go.
Can you hear me? Yep.
I had you on. You didn't have you on.
Oh, appreciate it. Again, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to offer to this committee. It should be in your packets, but it's to amend. Very simple amendment is to replace line 71 of the current form of the legislation, and it's to create a more inclusive class of protected individuals inside of this legislation. And I bring this amendment forward based on a very simple premise that all tax-paying Georgians, whether their tax dollars directly or go indirectly to, the services that this legislation would affect, deserve to, reap the fruits of their labor. And this group of protected characteristics or protected individuals in this amendment is more inclusive than what is currently laid out in the current legislation as it is. That's why I offer this amendment.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion by members of the committee? Somewhat, of course, we've made your motion, and certainly there's been a second on it. Let me say that I am a little bit concerned with this amendment at this time. Of course, the members will have the opportunity to vote, of course. In that, I don't know that your amendment, and based on the bill as it's drawn, if we've got a good definition, and you start then defining people and setting out groups without having a group already defined in the bill, we may leave somebody behind or may not have somebody in that should be in it. And certainly you certainly have the right to offer your amendment, which you have done so, but I'm a little bit dubious at this time as to why we would need the amendment now, but get the bill and get it before the full committee so that everybody would have an opportunity to talk about it. Who is 7? Representative Evans. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a piece of discussion following on your comments. Obviously, we're all lawyers, and definitions are important. But I just wanted to just add my voice here to say that these words, and Representative Bennett, I'm sure will correct me if I'm wrong, are well, they're not new. They're words that can be found in federal legislation, and we don't have any definition for, as far as I know, unless I'm missing it in here, we don't have any definitions for religion or national origin. I mean, we're using words that come up in these types of pieces of legislation a lot, and I, for one, think I'm the only woman in here right now. I think I at least speak for myself, if not others of my gender, that we would appreciate the opportunity to have our grievances handled quickly within the state too, instead of having to be forced to only be at the mercy of the federal process. And I'm sure that our aging population and veterans would appreciate that same opportunity as well.
All right, thank you very much. Chairman Fleming.
Mr. Chairman, to Representative Evans' point, she's incorrect in that there are definitions here of all those other things. There's 50 years plus federal litigation where definitions have been set forth by the courts in this state, in this nation, that can be relied upon because the Act specifically references the federal Act. So every word that is in the current Act before you, as Representative Golick introduced it, does have a long list of definitions that comes in federal case law, which can be very helpful to explain this. That is not true with the amendment.
My point was that,
Go ahead.
My point was that they're not defined in this bill, and some of the other categories are well treaded as well. That was my only point.
All right, thank you. Representative Weldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to the author of the amendment, could you just define for me, maybe I'm just live a little too far in the woods, but I'm not sure what gender identity means and what group of folks that identifies. Could you help me understand that?
Can you hear? Yes. Certainly attempt to help you understand that. Gender identity is a protected class of individuals that, there is a large population of people that suffer discrimination based on what psychologists, medical professionals have all categorized as gender identity disorder. And so this is a group of people that do suffer from discrimination because of this, the characteristic that makes them who they are. And as the chairman pointed out, this definition of gender identity included in this is to ensure that these people are not left behind in the language of this legislation.
Okay. Well, let me ask you, we don't have bullies in here, and we don't have those who overcome bullies in here. This seems like sort of the whole bill kind of seems like something we're trying to make sure somebody doesn't get bullied by somebody else. And, those who overcome bullies seem to be the ones that usually do pretty well on down the road, so to speak, or throughout life. But I appreciate that. I'm concerned about your amendment. It just seems a bit broad. Thank you.
Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Another question here for the author of this amendment. Chairman Golick has brought a bill that he's based off of federal language, and like Representative Bruce, I feel like his language is probably taking us too long to get there. But that's my question is under the federal law that Chairman Golick has referenced, how many of the protected classes that you're creating in your amendment are currently covered under federal law?
So the current federal legislation as it relates to public accommodation includes race. We have race, color, religion, and national origin. And that's currently the scope of what we're talking about in terms of public accommodation and complaints that the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice would hear. And this legislation effectively goes a little bit beyond that to ensure that we do include groups of individuals who are not included under federal legislation to fill the gaps that the author of the legislation is attempting to do. And that is the purpose of creating a little bit more of a expansive list of individuals and characteristics of individuals that would be covered under it.
So this currently would expand further the protection under federal law.
It would expand just in terms of the individuals that are recognized under this legislation at the state level. Yes, it would expand further than what the federal legislation has.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Bruce.
You know, if it's okay to make a comment.
Yes, sir.
Okay. You know, when the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964, some of the classes that are in this amendment, it really wasn't an issue, a public issue back then. And if it is that we are trying to set the record straight and do the right thing, and even though it's 60 years later, there are new issues that have come up, and this amendment addresses those new issues. So if we are in fact trying to do the right thing, I don't think we ought to wait another 60 years to fix the problems that we're dealing with today. So that's why I'm going to support the amendment, and I ask that the rest of us do the same thing if we are sincere about trying to do the right thing.
Representative Evans, did I cut you off? I apologize. Go ahead, please.
That's okay, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. And we've talked. There definitely, I feel like there's some concern from some members of the committee about certain of these categories that Representative Bennett proposes to add with this amendment. But I'm not hearing any concern about the addition of, at the very least, sex and disability and age. Those are currently covered by federal law. I just want to make sure that we're clear that not every category that's being attempted to be added by this amendment is new. And certainly we are attempting to add a couple additional categories here in Georgia because along the lines of what Representative Bruce is saying, we want to do the right thing early this time or on time and not late. And we want to extend some protections to the GLBT community and also to our veterans, and I think that's a good thing.
Thank you. Representative Kelly, did you?
No,
All right. All right. Any other members of the committee want to call the question? All in favor of the amendment as proposed would say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Aye. Looks like we're going to have a vote. All in favor of the amendment would please raise your hand. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. All opposed, same sign. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Amendment fails.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
And I'm asking simply out of information. It's a friendly question. We've got 2 ex officio members of the committee that are here, as far as I know, are not assigned to a specific subcommittee, and I was just asking for clarification on how ex officio members become members of a particular subcommittee.
They become the ex officio members because they're members of this committee as a whole, and even without their vote, if they were not here, this amendment would have failed for lack of a majority. And likewise, I voted with the majority, so that's out of order.
Oh no, I understand, Mr. Chairman. I just am asking for clarification if other members of the full committee are able to vote ex officio on other subcommittees.
Yes, they are.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
And I understand what you just said, but just out of curiosity, if possible, this is the 3rd or 4th meeting of this committee, and I've been on this committee for years, and this is the first time I've seen these 2 gentlemen come and vote on this subject, and I'm just curious as to why this go round. Why did they decide to come vote this time and not the other times?
I guess each member has their own reasons for coming to various committee meetings, and they also have the right to because they're on this committee. We'll call the question now on the bill as it stands before the floor, the original bill. have a recommendation. I have a motion and a second to pass. All in favor to pass would say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Bill passes, goes on to full committee.